Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties Radio, Season 6, Episode 13. I am Lee. I am in Western Australia. This week I am joined by Tammy and Vikas, both from Canberra.
Hello, how's it going?
Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're back after a couple of week break, just through various things and being busy and this and that and all the rest.
There was the Freedman, and then
Friedman was there.
I decided to go up to the Gold Coast. So.
Yeah.
So this week we're going to start off with the AFP raids, and then we're going to go into talking about Vikas's burning itch for what's going on with Vox, and Vox going after ad revenue, the advertisers for the Stephen Crowder YouTube channel. So let's start off with the AFP raids. I think it's pretty well known what's happened with that, but for those who don't know, the AFP raided in the last week or so a News Corp journalist and the officers of the ABC chasing after documents relating to leaks around
the Afghanistan.
Yes,
the
yeah. So
Afghanistan
the News Corp journalist was raided over stuff to. Sorry, no. Basically, the soldiers doing stuff in Afghanistan, but also there was a story. I think the News Corp one was the one about spying, a plan to expand spying powers of the federal government. This has caused a lot of discussion about the freedom of the press. The Morrison government has done their best to try and distance themselves from their own policing agency. What is everybody's thoughts?
So I find it interesting that they're kicking up a stink about this now, because I actually looked up an article from 2012 where Labor had effectively, the then Gillard government had executed 54 search warrants in a single year.
Nice.
This was in 2012.
On journalists?
On journalists.
Okay.
54 were executed in the year 2012. And I'll pull up the, we can pull up the Sydney Morning Herald article on that. So we'll include it down in the bottom. But this was a thing that happened in 2012, and I think News Corp and The Guardian were the only two papers that brought this up. The ABC was very silent on it back then. And they've kind of kicked up a stink about it now, and I don't know what the statistics are, but these seem to be 3 in just this year. So I find it interesting about the timing of their complaints about this. Now, there's been bipartisan support between both parties to push for these powers. So I feel like there's like this thing where we can point to what David Leyonhjelm said from 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, warning that journalists could be the target of these new powers that were being created. And I sit there going like, I feel like that person in the room that goes, I told you so, or rather we told you so. And I know we shouldn't gloat, but we technically did tell them.
Yes. So that was something that Brian Marlow, who's a friend of us all, he's the executive director at the Australian Taxpayers Office, he made a comment on Facebook saying how, he was then with David Leyonhjelm and the media advisor at the time, just going to the different journalist offices saying, hey, you guys, you should know this thing. And no one really picked up on it. So, it's just one of those things that, we very rarely get any kind of, most of the time when you see sort of terrorism powers used, it's when somebody's arrested. So it's not like it's, fortunately we don't live in a police state quite yet. So just sort of the arbitrary exercise of power is something we very rarely see. And this is kind of one of those times. And so, libertarians were obviously hopefully always going to be ahead of the curve on this stuff because we see this stuff coming, but most people don't, which is a shame.
I'm interested to ask, because from the articles that you're referring to, I think it was from 2012, did you notice that the publicity was greater back then or less than what it is now? So comparing under a Gillard government.
So to be perfectly honest, I remembered this like vaguely in passing, and it was actually I think it was Michael Ailing that actually once I kind of went like, I remember this happening during Gillard, and he actually pulled up the article, and then I tried to look up for other articles on this, and there was only there were only the 2 articles. They were both on the same day. It happened around.
So
I don't want to say right now. I'll pull up the articles. Huh?
It wasn't viral in any sense.
No. And that was something that I wanted to bring up. It's just like, given how much attention has been on this for 3 raids, I kind of sit there going like, okay, so there's a lot of attention on it now. What's prompted this now, given that like there appeared to be a really large number of them being executed back during the Gillard era. And you know, at that time you had people coming out like actually I won't mention any names, but there were public servants that were responsible for leaks, and they were going pretty freaking hard on them. So I kind of sit there and going like, it seems to me like a complicit media thing where they were kind of letting Gillard get the soft touch. But hey, look, I mean, it happened 6 years. It happens what, like 7 years ago now. So maybe there was a reason not to be that fussed about what was going on there. But the main actual issue for me about this is so Christian. Sorry, no, what's his name? The SAS guy, the West Australian SAS guy.
Andrew Hastie.
Andrew Hastie. So Andrew Hastie is now part of the Intelligence Committee, right? And he was the subject of one of the Afghanistan file stories. He was technically one of the commanding officers. Sorry, not the commanding officers, one of the guys in charge of one of those units.
Right.
And I can't believe he's still a member of the committee, given like the National Security Committee is one of the ones that influences the AFP.
Interest, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of sit there and go like, this is one of those instances where he should either be stepping away from the committee or like going, there's a massive conflict of interest here, right? So it's something that the media has completely missed, and I kind of sat there going like, am I imagining something, or is this like the media being like, you know, ooh, shiny, shiny, and like not realizing this big thing that's actually right there in front of them, going, Andrew Hastie, part of the Intelligence Committee, also AFP, part of the Intelligence Committee. He was the subject of the Afghanistan files. AFP is writing about the Afghanistan file. I'm sitting there going like, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy nutter, but I'm there going like,
hey,
this seems like something someone should be looking at.
Need to have.
Like, I don't want to go out and get like a tinfoil hat, but I'm there going like, this seems like an obvious thing to look at to me.
I mean, it's one of those things where there's, I mean, like that is one element of it, but there's also just general coziness between the government and the AFP, which obviously makes sense, you know, since the AFP are an agency of the government. But like with the leaks from what's her name's office, female cabinet minister. Anyway, there was, you know, the AFP declined to prosecute or investigate.
Michaela Cash.
That's it, yeah. You know, around leaks from her office, because of course this is the double standard. The government can leak anything it wants. It can leak any amount of information, and there's never any repercussions. No one's ever going to go to prison for that.
Absolutely.
But it's when it's leaked out and the government doesn't want it to be leaked out, that's when people get prosecuted. That's when you have raids. So, I mean, there is a general element of coziness and double standards being employed between, you know, how the government is treated when it leaks as opposed to when, you know, we would be treated if
I mean, I can understand that. So one of the principles of like information security with respect to like the way our government works is that anyone in the ministry can technically declassify a document right there, right?
Sure. Yep.
Because the document belongs to their department. They're the head of that department. They have the power under our system to classify and declassify documents as they see fit. Now, the check against that is if they declassify a document that they shouldn't have, clearly it impacts them negatively in terms of the wider population at the next election. That's the justification for it.
Sure, yeah.
But I think the reason, the coziness that you're talking about is because effectively the public service and the executive bodies would just see these effectively Muppets as the information owners. And if they want to act like Muppets with the information they own, that's their prerogative to do so.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, and there is a logic there to which, like, I definitely don't want to give the government, I guess, more discretion to decide these things. I certainly don't want to break off the public service and give them autonomy from the government.
Oh God, no.
So, like, in some ways, this is like a feature of the system. I think there's generally an issue with how classification of government documents work. That is, from my understanding of how it works, which, I mean, I'm in no way an expert about this. This is, and this is not an area of that outside of, say, Reason magazine, you're ever going to read about in the media.
Okay,
but like,
so
generally speaking, from my understanding, is that there's a lot of discretion for ministers to, and for agencies to classify things when really there should be a presumption of non-classification. That is, you should only be able to classify things you have a strong reason to, rather than governments be able to classify everything and then, with their discretion. Does that make sense?
So I like to defer to Andrew Wilkie on this, and he said the incentive structure in the national security circuits tends to be to classify something and then declassify it after you've reviewed it a long time later, rather than just actually take the time, at the time that you're receiving the information.
Exactly.
And you know what, I kind of sit based on what Wilkie has said, look. Out of all of Parliament, that national security portfolio, the only one who has any credibility in that topic is Andrew Wilkie.
Yes.
And he's not a Liberal.
No.
Right? So,
no. Which, for anybody who's too young to remember, Andrew Wilkie was a leaker, if I recall correctly.
He was.
The Iraq War. So he worked in those agencies. He, shared information around the invasion of Iraq. This is 2004.
And he said Australian intelligence. So what he was doing was he was pointing out that Australian intelligence at the time was saying we can't find evidence of weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
And it turned out he was right.
Yes, correct. And then he got elected to Parliament as an independent, and he's basically been in there ever since. So
yeah. So like I said, in terms of like credibility across all of Parliament, he's the only one that I can point to and say, everyone seems to universally agree he knows national security.
Yeah.
It's even probably not a good thing for the Liberals.
Everything else.
Yeah.
It's not too bad.
Yeah, but the funny thing there is the whistleblower for the Afghanistan files was also a former Liberal. In fact, he'd actually run as a Liberal.
All right.
For the seat of Cogra.
There you go.
It's interesting. I just want to ask you guys, how do you think, obviously it's got a lot more publicity this time around, how do you think this will affect quality investigative journalism? How do you think it's going to affect our journalistic climate?
I think it's probably worth pointing out at this point that so this is not like Assange where he's being prosecuted for publishing leaked documents. It's just that these journalists have been raided. So probably the bigger issue is around... It's an execution
of a search warrant.
It's an execution of a search warrant. So essentially they're going after the leakers per se. So the issue is not so much will journalists be prosecuted for this, it's will people be willing to leak to journalists if they know that they cannot secure their documents and cannot secure their identity.
Yeah.
I think it's going to make it harder, but it doesn't make it impossible because I think even something you pointed out, Vikas, on Facebook, in this week was the setting up of private... key, basically private drop boxes where you can leave documents. The head of the Twitter for the ABC Investigations Unit, I think, put out a thing just saying literally send us it in the post, like if you want to, or talk to us face to face.
That's not a bad idea. Seriously, if you send an encrypted, if you pretend you are a leaker and in no way am I advising anyone to break any national security laws here.
I'm going to volunteer. Please break federal laws. Please tell us.
Just to be sure, I'm not the one saying to break the law. But what I'm saying is, it would be absolutely fine to put all of your data encrypted onto a CD, pop it into a mailbag, and send it to that PO box.
Yeah.
Sure, it's incredibly analog. There's no chain of custody. There's no way that evidence could ever be used in any criminal prosecutions. But sure, you could do that.
Yeah. So it certainly makes the job of journalists harder. It won't stop them, and certainly, I don't think it's going to dissuade them from doing their work.
No.
Yeah. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this goes. It doesn't seem like Labor in particular has any reason to press the government. So their line of attack is not like this is an improper use of government power. It's the government has botched this. So it doesn't seem like Labor actually give a flying fuck about the core issue, which is the national security state, because they're on board for that.
So Albo got up there and he's just like, this is about you misusing. No, this is about you being heavy-handed with the AFP on raiding the ATO offices. And I sat there going like, what?
Yeah.
I think the issue is that they raided the ABC offices I mean, I'd imagine the bar to look. There is nothing in as far as I can understand that prevents an office of the ABC being raided by a search under a search warrant.
Yeah.
There's no magical constitutional protection that says this is an ABC building. You can't touch that.
Yeah.
Right. So, and even in the US, that wouldn't occur. Right.
No.
Like journalist offices can get raided. The idea is basically that there is a higher burden to meet if you go to a judge, because obviously they've got the public interest on their side, right? When they've reported something, it's like we made a report based on the public interest.
Sure.
So,
which, I mean, to an extent, there's problems with that in and of itself, like creating a protected class of citizens who they can handle these documents, but then us, we plebs, can't.
Well, I don't know
if that's like if that's been taken to like, you know, because we've talked about this before when we've talked about like these counterterrorism laws. You know, we've talked about like they've started to try. They sort of end up in territory where they're carving out exemptions. I don't know if we're quite that bad yet, but like it is a problem to say that only certain citizens are allowed to have access to these documents. Or
hang on. They've always made public interest exemptions, right? The only law where they didn't was like last year's one, and that was because the public interest exemption already existed for the part that they were changing.
Yeah.
Right. Or rather, modernizing. Basically, they added in a whole bunch of things about wiretapping, new ways of wiretapping. Yeah. Right. Because of the way that some of these laws work is effectively if like the specific technology is not mentioned or something, all of a sudden it's like the government has to pretend we don't know how to do that.
Sure.
Despite the fact that the reality is completely different. So when they update the laws, right, and someone goes, oh, there's no public interest exemption, it's because, well, read the legislation. It's already there. All they did was update these parts. It's not like that all of a sudden invalidates that other section that's got the public interest exemption in there.
But I mean, I do think there is a problem in creating certain classes of citizens who are able to engage with this kind of material and publish this kind of material that others can't. I mean, I think that's generally.
I think gradually, what needs to happen is
like for example, this does sort of go into the Assange territory, which is is because he's not working for the Washington Post or the New York Times. Does that mean he's somehow more susceptible to being charged under the Espionage Act or whatever it is? I think he's being charged under the Espionage Act now, but like, should that be the case? I don't think that should be the case. I think anybody, if you and I put up a Google Docs folder with a bunch of documents saying, that special forces in Afghanistan have been murdering civilians, I don't think you and I should be any more liable for prosecution than, like Annabelle Crabb.
Like Julian Assange. Oh, yeah, sure. And I suppose, like I said, what I was trying to get at was maybe as the respect for citizen journalism goes up, it might end up being a case that we arrive at that.
Yeah,
that's true. The journalistic climate is changing so much because of social media, etc. Citizen journalism is so prominent. Everyone's a journalist these days. Yeah. Would someone be held just as liable if they were just a regular citizen who came across that information and then?
Sure.
And on that point,
can I just quickly point out, like, a possibility is that with I mean, I don't know how it's possible. I'm sure it is at some level, but with things like blockchain and like decentralized technology, maybe there'll be a future situation where somebody does leak these documents, not just to journalists, but literally just uploads them to the net or allows them to be shared through a decentralized platform like that. And then knowing who that person is, you can't just go to a journalist's office and say, okay, hand over your files, we're going to try and figure out who the leaker is. That's something which we yet to see. I don't think we've yet seen a big example of like a huge break that's come through there, but it's probably possible that one day that will happen where, an Edward Snowden is not going to give it to Glenn Greenwald. He's just going to be, the future Edward Snowden is just going to literally just put it on the net in a decentralized fashion. So we'll see.
It's possible. But on that note, I mean, assuming you don't pick a fight with a big media company like Vox, Right?
Wow, there's a segue. Okay, we're getting to Vicus's hobby horse for the week, which is
The
Stephen.
Vox Adpocalypse.
The Vox Apocalypse. So, correct me if I've got the background wrong, but the background of this was that Stephen Crowder is a right-wing YouTuber who's been
Comedian.
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 He's on YouTube. I yeah. He for me most notably is the person in the original "Tell Me I'm Wrong." Change my mind. Image, which became a meme. But he basically was being very mean towards a Vox and saying, genuinely awful things about a Vox particular writer at the website Vox. Vox have then responded by sort of going to YouTube and saying, look, we think he's breaching your terms and conditions. Then there was a whole thing of he was taken off and then put back on and then demonetized. And now Vox is sort of talking, like going to the different advertisers
sponsors,
sponsor for his show or for you. It's not for YouTube, it's for his show.
No, for YouTube in general.
Oh, YouTube
they're going to them and
hey, look,
saying like,
and okay, so Vikas, this is your baby.
Yeah, so
give me a reason
to
give a flying fuck about this because frankly, I don't.
Okay, so you probably should. So this is the first. So the thing is, Stephen Crowder is not like right wing. He's a comedian. He leans to the right in terms of his jokes, but he's actually pretty mainstream. He's about on par with. He might be slightly to the right of Dave Rubin. So this basically represents a media attack on what is effectively mainstream opinion. So what we mainstream populist opinion, basically. But so the fact that they're painting him as like this hard right sort of thing is basically representative of the problem. So what they did is they took clips of things that Carlos Maza has actually said about himself, and him just doing like a
this is
comedic
the person that
sort
Stephen
of
Crowder was going after, or saying things about the Maza.
No, he was just Stephen Crowder was imitating him. And if you want to see examples of comedians imitating, you can take a look at Trevor Noah. You can take a look at Jon Stewart. You can take a look at anyone from Comedy Central. He's done pretty much the same gig, right? Like he's making fun of someone saying something stupid in a political show. And to do that, obviously a little bit of imitation occurs. So the fact that they've managed to successfully paint him as like this hard right conservative sort of thing is smear attack that they were running. He's actually barely middle ground. Well, center. I'd say center right. I wouldn't say center, but yeah, he's definitely conservative, but not like hard right.
Yep.
But his political stance shouldn't matter, regardless.
No.
The point is that someone has been offended by something, and then because of that, they've used that as collateral to have him demonetized or kicked off the platform.
Well, the actual fight between Carlos Maza and Stephen Crowder has actually been going on for a lot longer than what happened in the last week. It's just Carlos Maza loses really badly when you actually listen to the shit that he says. So just to give you an example, 2 weeks ago, he was out there saying, milkshake them all. The conservatives should be afraid of coming out in public. He said that, and Stephen Crowder made fun of him.
Yes, and Stephen Crowder never ever encouraged anyone to commit violence. Well, that's an act of violence, essentially. So he never, Stephen Crowder never encouraged anyone to do that.
Not just that, but when he brought up that he was getting doxxed or something like that, Stephen Crowder immediately denounced it, saying, hey, don't do it, right? I wouldn't like it being done to me. Don't do it to him.
No.
So, so the point is basically, the fact that they've been able to portray this as like a hard right thing is actually representative of like the media's activist wing doing what it does. So they've taken a whole bunch of stuff of his, put it out of context, and effectively tried to paint him. And if your news is coming from mainstream media, you're going to think he's like this hard right guy next to Alex Jones. He's not. He's no different than the comedians you'll see on Comedy Central.
Well, apart from his politics.
Apart from his politics.
The main.
Pro-life.
So, okay, so the question for me is, so the reason, generally I don't care about these things because I mean I don't watch his show and I'm not relying depending on an income from him, so it's like it doesn't directly affect me. I mean, there like this is it's I mean I think one of the issues because I mean this is not just like this is not an isolated issue where this is like the only place that this has ever happened. There's lots of this going on all the time in different ways and on different sides. So like this whole thing about like this kids show with the gay marriage scene in it. Arthur was the show, and you know the teacher gets, and then there was like you know a backlash in I think it was Alabama where like the public, you know the public broadcaster there was not going to play the thing. You know, so like my general thing is like this is like there's an ongoing conversation across all of society where people are pushing backwards and forwards and saying what is and isn't acceptable.
Sure.
And I don't know why I should be particularly aggrieved by this thing as opposed to anything else. Because
but this isn't
a moral about Arthur as much as I don't care about Stephen Crowder.
So this isn't a moral panic. So what they've actually done, I would have loved to call it a moral panic. That is, they're just going to the government to try and get something banned. But where they sort of stepped into actual malicious behavior, and it's pretty obvious why they're doing it. Stephen Crowder's channel is 3.8 million, and it's kind of growing now since this entire thing began. He's done this mug club thing. Most of his income comes from mug club, not from ads on YouTube.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
So he's about to make a killing on this. Vox, on the other hand, turned over their first profit this year. And they're currently looking like they might go back in the negative because they're having a bit of a union dispute with their workers. Now,
which I mean, frankly, the whole media is struggling to turn a profit, so it's like not particularly,
agreed.
you know.
Agreed. But Vox is basically doing this because what they've targeted advertisers, right?
Yeah.
That's when it sort of switched into okay. So now you're not doing like a personal beef or a moral panic, right? You're going after someone's business.
Sure.
And where they fucked it up is they took out independent journalists. So Ford Fisher, are you aware of it? So so part of some of the changes that they requested from YouTube.
Oh, actually, no, I did. He goes to like right wing like protests and stuff and interviews people. That's the one.
Yeah. That's Ford Fisher.
Yeah.
So Ford Fisher's channel has now been demonetized.
Yeah. Sure.
Because it shows members of the right.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, the adpocalypse, or rather what Vox has sort of worked with YouTube to sort of create, has now resulted in a whole bunch of independent journalists losing their income.
Sure.
It doesn't affect Crowder because Crowder's income has not been coming from YouTube for a long time now.
Sure.
And it's affecting effectively independent and small creators that are effectively in competition with Vox.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's pretty obvious what they've done. And this is why I asked the question yesterday, would it amount to tortious interference?
I mean, I don't think it is obvious what they've done. I mean, it's obvious what they've done in terms of their campaign or whatever, but I mean, to say this is all just a nefarious plot for Vox to like take out a bunch of journalists they don't like, I don't think it's. I mean, my thing is don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity. That is, yes, this is a political campaign on their part. Is it? I mean, whether it's the whole of Vox or just certain aspects of Vox. But
well, YouTube's policy people spoke to Vox directly.
Yeah, sure. So So there is an overall issue in terms. I mean, people like Ford Fisher, Fisher Ford or whoever it is, that's because they fall foul of an algorithm. I mean, this is something we've talked about before on the show, which is all of these things are run by big dumb algorithms. You cannot, and I know I've made this point before, where it's like there's always gonna be, if you want to say, oh, we want to get rid of all the white supremacists, that's great. Okay, fine. You want to do that? That's your decision. Write an algorithm that gets rid of the white supremacist stuff, but then doesn't also wipe out like your Fisher Fords or whoever, people who are just interviewing them. It's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing for anybody. Like anybody who tries to do that is going to have trouble. YouTube has like 50 million minutes of content being uploaded every single second or something ridiculous. So, it's the amount of content that's being put on YouTube is so unbelievably huge. The idea that they're going to have an algorithm that can slice and dice to get the exact right thing, it's never going to happen. So yeah, I just say, well, you're going to have a backwards and forwards. I sort of thinking of this as some big conspiracy or nefarious conspiracy. I just don't see it.
I just don't. It's not a conspiracy.
When I say it's a conspiracy, I'm not saying
they literally messaged each other.
Sure,
that's out there.
That's a conspiracy. Like I'm not saying conspiracy is not true. I'm saying it.
Yeah.
Like, well, sorry. Like,
is it a conspiracy if they communicated? I mean,
of course. Well, they're not doing it in public.
No, sorry. Is it a conspiracy theory if they actually communicate?
No.
I'm sitting there going like it's a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy.
I'm saying it is a conspiracy. Sorry, I should say like saying that like so this is a conspiracy. At some level, there is a conspiracy. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But to say it's like a problem that there is this conspiracy, I'm not certain there is. I mean, for the reasons you pointed out, which is Steven Crowder, much like Alex Jones, does not get his funding purely through YouTube. So like people who got completely like bent out of shape because of Alex Jones, like he's got 2 million listeners on his radio show. He's going to be fine. The idiots who like his shit are going to be fine. He's gonna like. It's not like you can obliterate Steven Crowder from the face of the earth, even if he was kicked off YouTube. So like, I'm not overly exercised by this because this is just part of an overall process, and it kind of
probably helping them to get more views as well.
Yes, exactly. Streisand effect, perfect example. So
affiliate codes and things like that. Yeah.
So like. I mean, I think part of it is we've lived in this period of time where everything's been under Facebook, everything's been in YouTube. Like we've had large, huge tents that everybody's been under, and now maybe those tents are going to become a bit more siloed. Maybe, your Alex Joneses and your Steven Crowders and your blah blah blah. They're going to eventually migrate away from YouTube, and there'll be other things. And I'm fine with that. Like I don't have a problem with that. I don't think there is a grand need in the fabric of the universe to have everybody on YouTube or everybody on Facebook.
Well, the problem is that YouTube is the second largest search engine to Google. So YouTube is really, really important. So if it'd be a shame. Obviously, YouTube's a private company, so whoever they choose to allow to have on their platform, I think is their business. But it would be a shame for there not to be the balance. So yeah, if most political YouTubers are demonetized anyway, essentially it's probably getting them a lot of extra views actually talking about it. Hashtag is really making them go viral anyway, so it's just giving them a little bit more revenue there. But
I was gonna say that I'm pretty sure a whole bunch of people joined his mug club.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, but I don't actually care about what happens to Steven Crowder. It's actually all the independents and the smaller creators.
Yeah.
That's my main gripe about it. And I sat there going like, okay, so my point is, do these smaller, like I basically believed that these smaller creators could technically argue tortious interference because, hey, that's these guys went after their revenue source.
Well, but indirectly, I mean, I think, sorry to interrupt again, but like I think all of this stuff is an iterative process, which is like it's very difficult to say in the answer, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have these people and not these people. Like you need to kind of do something and then see how it goes and then fix it up if you get it wrong. Like it's an ongoing, it's a trial and error, and we don't know, like in 5 years, it matters more what things are like in 5 years time. It doesn't matter so much like right now, right this second, what's happening. And what matters is what's it going to be like in 5 years, and did in 5 years time we eventually kind of achieve the goals we're aspiring to now, if that makes sense.
I kind of buy if you don't watch Tim Pool, you probably should. So Tim Pool has raised the argument several times that we're pretty much already in a bit of a struggle that's going on between these large media organizations basically trying to silence smaller ones, varying on different policies and stuff like that. So for example, when Vox worked with YouTube to determine these new policies, right? So they actually, this was done through tweets and stuff. One of the things YouTube agreed to was promoting content from mainstream media sources. So like Vox, like your CNN, right? They agreed to push that out onto their front page and reduce content from untrustworthy sources.
Yep.
So reduce, the people that they demonetize. So what we're seeing, because history is condensed, I'm using a lot of Tim Pool's arguments here. Because history is condensed, we might be just living through this component right now where in 10 years' time, people will look back and go, okay, so this was one of the points where effectively the corporate media shut down all alternative media. It could be one of those points. And we do need to raise up that this is an actual pressing issue.
I mean, it might be. I'll make one final point, and then if you want to make either one of you want to make another point, we'll finish it there. So, I mean, I think like it's possible. Like it is theoretically possible they could do that. I think it's extremely unlikely they will be able to, just because the nature of these things is that, I mean, it's very hard to stamp out content. Like even if you're YouTube, you know, like sure they might be able to. At one point, maybe they will sort of just purge all the conservatives. But that doesn't mean the conservatives just like vanish into the ether. It means they'll just start something different. And maybe it won't be as successful as YouTube, but it doesn't mean it won't exist. You know, like I think of something like RTR FM, which is, I mean, it's probably taxpayer funded, but you know, largely it's a community radio that do their own fundraising. They play weird music. Like they have all alternative. It's basically like, imagine if it was Triple J, but took the hipster thing even more seriously. You know, like if you think Triple J is too mainstream, you will listen to RTR. Now, RTR obviously does not have the budget of Triple J, but they still exist, and they still fill that niche. And you know, so I suspect that in 5 years' time, that niche that Steven Crowder fills will still exist, and he'll still be able to make a living.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys can make a final point, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, there's obviously, if there's the interest there, that the market would accommodate that, and you're finding that a little bit. There are alternative media, social media platforms for the conservative right that are emerging, and a lot of them are. A lot of the feedback that I'm hearing is that people are going over to those platforms because they are worried that they will be losing their voice and their audience, and that they should have a backup platform for that. And I guess, if that's the way that private enterprise works, if they do purge out the conservatives, and if it's a private company, all power to them, as unfortunate as it is. The people, it's like reading the Daily Telly if you enjoy that kind of content versus reading the Guardian.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely. If that's the case, yes, it would still be a shame, I think, if that happened.
All right.
Absolutely.
Vikas, any final thoughts, or you want to leave it at that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thanks everybody for listening. We will hopefully be back again next week. Hopefully we're going to get back into like a regular routine. So yes, YouTube, iTunes, that's where you'll find us. Thanks very much.
Thanks.